Chapter 169. Uchiha Itachi looked indifferently at Sasuke's ferocious little face, taking in the hatred on his cheeks. At the same time, sadness flashed in the depths of his eyes. Although this method was a bit cruel, it was the most effective and direct way. "I'll kill you." Uchiha Sasuke jumped up, and his sharp kunai pierced towards Itachi's face. The killing intent in his eyes was as ferocious as a beast's. It seems that betrayal by his closest people has seriously distorted Uchiha Sasuke's physical and mental health. Fragile. Avoiding the oncoming cold light, Uchiha Itachi grabbed Uchiha Sasuke by force and pressed him to the ground like a rabbit, his face full of contempt. "The gap is too big. Now you really don't make me interested in killing you, Sasuke." Uchiha Itachi stepped on Uchiha Sasuke's head expressionlessly, and his breath was restrained. Killing Uchiha Sasuke was just a trivial matter for him. In the Naka shrine of the Uchiha clan, there is a stone tablet that records the history of the Uchiha clan, and also records the truth about the Sharingan. Itachi looked at Uchiha Sasuke under his feet and wiped out all the humanity in his heart, trying to maintain the coldness he had never had before. "The way to open Manjikyu Sharingan is to kill your own family, and I killed my parents with my own hands, so I got the power beyond Magatama Sharingan," Itachi said incomparably coldly. The coldness floating out of his body was like thousands of years of ice. His tone was extremely serious, full of indifference to the so-called feelings. Especially when he said that he killed his parents, it seemed that he was talking about the most ridiculous thing, and he directly snorted and showed disdain. This made Uchiha Sasuke look at his strange brother, who usually respected his parents the most, in disbelief. "Live on while you're at death's door. For now I'll temporarily keep you in a cage. When the day comes that you can open the same eyes as mine, I'll kill you." Without looking at Uchiha Sasuke, Itachi passed by him directly. As for Uchiha Sasuke under his feet, he treated him as air, as if he was nothing, like a breeze. Itachi frowned slightly and immediately turned around, revealing half of his indifferent face, and said, "My stupid brother, by the way, let me tell you something. Uchiha Dustless, our big brother, he seems to be alive." Thinking back, Itachi suddenly remembered everything that the Sandaime said. Although it was just a personal guess, there was always some kind of inexplicable feeling in his heart that was pulling him. "Impossible, he died many years ago." Uchiha Sasuke roared hysterically at Uchiha Itachi, denying everything about Uchiha Itachi, trying to deny this man's whole life. "Goodbye, my stupid brother." After saying that, without waiting for Uchiha Sasuke to react, Itachi disappeared without a trace. The boundless night sky was particularly bleak. In the vast Uchiha base, only Uchiha Sasuke was left, accompanied by the black night sky and scattered corpses behind him. During this period, Dustless came back again. In order to better fool Uchiha Sasuke, he made two similar corpses to confuse the kid, and it was inevitable that he would notice something. Early the next morning, the news of the Uchiha's annihilation quickly raged through Konoha like a hurricane, and even the whole world. The top clan for hundreds of years was massacred like a magnitude 10 earthquake. The whole world trembled. The Uchiha, who used to dominate the world for hundreds of years, was wiped out in a snap of the fingers. No one could remain calm. After all, there were too many unprecedented figures in this super clan. Uchiha Madara was invincible in the world, and then there was Uchiha Dustless. The prestige of the Uchiha was raised to an unprecedented peak period. Now that the entire clan was suddenly destroyed, no one was surprised that it was fake. The major ninja villages sent a large number of spies to Konoha's ninja village to spy on the secrets. However, Konoha didn't disappoint these people. On the same day, they announced that the culprit of the Uchiha's annihilation was Uchiha Itachi, the second son of Uchiha Fugaku. In other words, he was the main culprit who destroyed the Sand Village in the past, the younger brother of Uchiha Dustless. It has to be said that Konoha was particularly sensitive when it came to the Uchiha. The first thing they did was to announce that Uchiha Itachi was an S-class defector, and issued a wanted order to all the ninjas of various countries. They poured all the dirty water on Itachi, making him a scapegoat while they stayed out of the matter. It can be said that Konoha played the realm of shamelessness incisively and vividly. In the empty godly house, there were few people, and only a few people of different stature were standing side by side. These unknown mysterious people were all wearing black trench coats embroidered with red clouds, and their aura was cold, giving a very gloomy and oppressive feeling. These people were obviously led by the middle-aged man with orange hair in the middle, and they could clearly see that there were a lot of cold black iron rods inserted in his head. This group of people was, without a doubt, the members of the Akatsuki and their leader Pain Tendo. However, Uzumaki Nagato, who controlled Yahiko, became a lot smarter, and he knew that many people were interested in the Rinnegan. He didn't wear the Rinnegan like before, and his pupils looked like normal human eyes. Standing next to Yahiko was Kisame, who was carrying a big sword full of fangs, Sasori and Orochimaru. Obviously, in the past few years, Yahiko had collected a lot of strong people, and they weren't talkative people. They didn't talk to each other, and they didn't talk to each other. The new member is here. The leader of the Akatsuki, Yahiko, suddenly opened his eyes, and as his voice fell, Uchiha Itachi came into everyone's sight. Chapter 170. Itachi's weak and small figure came into view, as weak as a willow branch. Suddenly, a strong wind blew and Itachi's clothes fluttered in the wind. Especially his sickly pale face, he gave people a feeling of extreme fragility, like a patient who had just recovered from a serious illness, so weak that he couldn't even stand the wind. Seeing this scene, the members of the Akatsuki frowned slightly, including Tendo Pain, and couldn't help but doubt Itachi's strength. The Akatsuki was full of strong people, and all of them were S-class ninjas. Their strength was self-evident. Even if they weren't as strong as the Kages of the other villages, they were almost the same. Placing a sick person in the Akatsuki made everyone question Yahiko's approach. For those who truly knew Itachi, such as Orochimaru, his eyes lit up as he looked at Itachi. He naturally knew that Itachi was the culprit behind the destruction of the Uchiha clan. Moreover, before he defected, Itachi was a genius of the Uchiha clan with the same name as Shisui. There was another important factor that Orochimaru cared about the most. Itachi was the younger brother of Uchiha Dustless. He once teamed up with Dustless to fight against the Rock Village. Naturally, he knew better than anyone how strong Dustless was. At the same time, there were two people who had complicated thoughts. Naturally, it was Yahiko and Kisame, who was defeated by Dustless in the past. Both of them were defeated by Dustless. It was inevitable that they had a special impression of Itachi. Uchiha Dustless's younger brother. He shouldn't be weak. Yahiko took a deep breath and calmed down his complicated emotions. As a defeated opponent of White Dust, he naturally knew how terrifying White Dust could be compared to Kisame, who was defeated in an instant. Under everyone's surprised gaze, Itachi walked straight in, but strangely the cold wind from before chose to avoid him. Whenever it came in contact with Itachi's hurricane, it would take a detour. Uchiha, welcome to the Akatsuki. As the leader of the Akatsuki, Pain naturally took a step forward and welcomed Itachi. However, at any time, any place, any event, there would always be some unexpected characters who would jump out and do unexpected things. Hey, is this guy really suitable to join Akatsuki? Look at his weak and bony appearance. This uncle is very doubtful, am I right, Kakuzu? An ear-piercing and heroic voice rang out. Raising their heads, they saw a man holding a red 3-section scythe. His face was filled with arrogance as he walked out of the shadows. Just by looking at his face, one could tell that he was an extremely arrogant person. It was Fei Duan from the Akatsuki organization. He wore a ring with the word 3 on his finger. Kakuzu's green eyes first fell on Uchiha Itachi. Looking at the expressionless Itachi, his eyes flashed with surprise and then glanced at Haiden. It has nothing to do with me. If you have any questions, solve them yourself. Ignoring the crazy Haiden, Kakuzu retracted his gaze and put on a look of indifference. His green eyes were vaguely playful. Obviously, he saw Itachi's true strength. This is definitely an unparalleled strong man. It's Haiden. Tendo Pain turned around and looked at Haiden gloomily. His eyes were filled with haze. Just as he was about to scold Haiden not to ask for trouble, Uchiha Itachi's voice sounded. Do you want to try? Itachi's dark and deep eyes fell on the arrogant Haiden. He frowned slightly and his eyes flashed with indifference. Itachi said, the gap between us is too big. Judging from your weapon, you should be a strength-type ninja. It's not bad. However, we are not in the same dimension. Staring at the 3-section scythe on Haiden's shoulder, Itachi said softly with some persuasion. He was good at genjutsu and Haiden was good at taijutsu. This type of ninja is generally very poor in defensive genjutsu. In that case, let me show you the power of Master Haydn. The corner of his mouth twitched fiercely and Haydn took the scythe off his shoulder. The weapon that weighed thousands of pounds was like a toy in his hand. It was dazzling to play with and he seemed to be extremely skilled. Sure enough, it's an unusual organization. There are all kinds of people. No wonder Sandaime Hokage said that the people who attacked Konoha a few years ago may be related to people in this organization. Itachi's eyes swept over several people in the Akatsuki organization. Especially when he saw Orochimaru, his heart fell to the bottom. Even Orochimaru, one of the Sannin, can join the Akatsuki organization. Can also be seen that the Akatsuki is extraordinary. What Itachi cared about most was that the so-called leader was inserted with black iron rods all over his body. He was cold all over and there was no sign of life. Obviously he was like a puppet. Let me teach you a lesson on behalf of the leader and let you know what it means to respect the old and love the young. A newcomer should know the rules that newcomers should know. With a ferocious face, Haydn rushed over, but his speed was still very slow, at least in Itachi's eyes. At the moment, his dark eyes just stared at Haydn without fear. The deep three tomo were like blood-red gems inlaid in his pupils, flashing with a strange luster. What a powerful eye power, worthy of being Dustless's younger brother. Orochimaru looked at Itachi's pupils with blazing eyes, and his heart was burning with excitement. Especially at the moment when the three tomo flashed, his heart was in his throat and he almost danced with joy. The covetousness and eagerness in his eyes were undisguised. It was precisely because he had seen the power of Dustless's Sharingan that Orochimaru would be so persistent in his pursuit of the Sharingan. Damn, what's going on? Haydn's angry voice exploded and his eyes swept over. Itachi's forehead was covered with cold sweat and his body couldn't move. It seemed that he was forcibly imprisoned. His eyes were full of dark red flames and his three tomo Sharingan was staring. Chapter 171. Haydn's abnormality naturally fell into everyone's eyes. Immediately, the line of sight of everyone in Akatsuki organization was drawn over. Looking at Haydn, who was unable to budge, his four limbs seemed to be fixed. They frowned one after another and some of them even frowned. This Uchiha Itachi's genjutsu attainment is really terrifying. He just glanced at Haydn and made him unable to move. What a terrifying man. He deserves to be the younger brother of Uchiha Wuchen. Sure enough, he's not an ordinary person. Tendo Pain looked at Uchiha Itachi in surprise, and then looked at Haydn, who couldn't move even after using all his strength. He couldn't help but nod secretly and was very satisfied with Uchiha Itachi's performance. As for the trapped Haydn, he can only blame himself for being the first bird. I must get the Sharingan. Compared with the other members of the organization who were simply surprised, Orochimaru's heart was as clear as a mirror. He was much clearer that this was just a three-tomo Sharingan, and he needed a higher level of Manjikyu Sharingan. Since he defected from Konoha, due to the fact that he teamed up with Dustless during the period, he was influenced by Dustless's dojutsu. He has always been eager to get the Sharingan of Uchiha, even to a state of madness. He would do anything for the Sharingan, especially since Uchiha Itachi was the younger brother of the former Uchiha Dustless. This identity attracted Orochimaru's attention even more. This is a good opportunity. Orochimaru's eyes scattered quietly. Seeing that everyone was still immersed in the strangeness of the Sharingan, Orochimaru laughed secretly. Of course, he wouldn't choose to attack Uchiha Itachi now because all the members of the Akatsuki were here. I'm afraid that only a top powerhouse like the first Hokage could leave safely under the siege of the Akatsuki. Orochimaru still understood this point. Let me go if you have the guts, and let Uncle Haydn teach you how to be a man. Flying Duan, who had been trying to break free from the illusion for a long time without success, had a livid expression on his face. It was as ugly as a black pot that had been burning for thousands of years. Coupled with his fiendish appearance and the crimson three-part scythe in his hand, he gave off the feeling of a grim reaper on earth. Looking at Itachi's calm face, Haydn's eyes were twitching, and he immediately looked at Kukazu, who had a playful smile on his face, and he was so depressed that he almost vomited blood. Why aren't you coming over to help? We're on the same team. We're bound together for good or ill. If I lose, you'll lose face too. Haydn shouted at Kakuzu, and at the same time he couldn't help cursing Kakuzu in his heart. They were teammates, they should help each other instead of watching. Hearing this, Kakuzu looked hesitant. Although he was quite afraid of Itachi, but with Haydn, even if they can't defeat him, they can still deal with him. Especially as Haydn said, they are on the same team. If Haydn is unlucky, then Kakuzu won't have a good ending, and Haydn is usually quite good, although his behavior is a bit unreliable, but at the critical moment he can be trusted. Stop, Itachi. Seeing that Kakuzu wanted to help, Yahiko slightly frowned, waved his hand and said with a firm tone. At the same time, there was a hint of warning in his voice. Whether it is Uchiha Itachi, Kakuzu or Haydn, if they dare to challenge his authority, they will definitely not have a good ending. Got it. Uchiha Itachi nodded, then he removed the genjutsu binding Haydn, and stood in the same place without any expression, carefully looking at the members of Akatsuki. His task is to investigate the Akatsuki, and at the same time to find out whether the masked man who attacked Konoha was the one who controlled the Akatsuki. At least you know what's good for you. If there's a next time, Master Fei Duan will definitely not forgive you. Hearing Yahiko's words, Haydn could only snort and glare fiercely at Itachi. His mood was particularly gloomy. Not only did he not find any sense of superiority, but he was also humiliated by Itachi. Although he couldn't wait to beat Itachi, Haydn didn't dare to disobey Yahiko's order. As Conan said before, Yahiko has the absolute right to speak in the Akatsuki, and his order is equivalent to the command of God. Welcome to the Akatsuki, Itachi. Your code name is Suzaku, and this is your clothes and ring. After throwing the black uniform and the ring with the word, Suz, to Itachi, Yahiko looked around and said with a long tone. The people in the organization have been gathered, and from now on, Itachi and Kisame will perform the task together. Kisame stared at Itachi, and to be honest, he really felt that it was ridiculous to team up with Dustless's younger brother. He even felt that he was dreaming, a very unrealistic dream. After all, Dustless defeated him in May. If Dustless didn't deliberately let them go, it's likely that they would have died many years ago, not to mention teaming up with Uchiha Itachi. From now on we will be a team. Kisame walked to Itachi's side. He was much stronger than Itachi, and the height of the two soon formed a contrast, and Itachi didn't look worth mentioning. I hope we can get along well in the future. Looking at Itachi, who was shorter than him and much thinner, Kisame said seriously and showed a kind smile. Although it looked strange with his shark face, it was sincere. At that time, Uchiha Wuchen didn't look as tall as Itachi, but he crushed him with his godlike strength. It was like the autumn wind sweeping the fallen leaves. I hope so too. Hearing this, Itachi nodded. He could feel that Kisame's words were from the bottom of his heart, and there was no falsehood in his words. He also felt that Kisame gave him a good feeling. For a moment the two felt a sense of appreciation for each other. Chapter 172. Looking up at Itachi and Kisame, Nagato, who was secretly controlling Yahiko, was relieved. He nodded with satisfaction and his eyes flashed with a burning luster. In this way, the Akatsuki's list given by Dustless was finally complete. Is it my illusion? Yahiko, who was meditating, suddenly raised his head and looked at the distant sky. He couldn't help but frown as he felt that he was being watched. Maybe it's my fault. After carefully perceiving, Yahiko didn't find anything strange. He thought that maybe his nerves were too sensitive, and he didn't think that anyone in the world could escape his perception. I haven't seen you for a few years, and I didn't expect Uzumaki Nagato's strength to skyrocket. A frivolous and slightly surprised voice sounded. The person who was watching was actually Dustless. He didn't expect Uzumaki Nagato's strength to improve so fast that he could even detect his presence. It seems that Yahiko's death hit him a lot, and this hatred turned into a motivation to practice. But this is good. Staring at the vague figure in the distance, Dustless said with a relieved smile, and then looked at Kisame, who quickly got along with Uchiha Itachi and couldn't help but shake his head. To some extent, these two people are really in tune, and can be regarded as an absolute combination of wisdom and courage. Dustless Sama. The ground at Dustless's feet suddenly exploded, and the Nepenthes came out of it. Staring at Dustless with a teasing smile on his face, White Zetsu said, It seems that the chess pieces are all gathered, Zetsu. But before that, let's watch a good show. Looking at the members of the Akatsuki, Dustless's eyes fell on Orochimaru as he said, Itachi, I have some private matters to discuss with you. Orochimaru tried his best to remain calm and said to Itachi in a kind tone. Even if it sounded strange, Orochimaru said that he had done his best. However, the more Orochimaru was like this, the more Itachi felt that he was plotting something. Orochimaru, a snake doesn't live with an ant. You should understand such a simple truth. Kisame directly interrupted, not giving any face to Orochimaru, this senior, at all. Everyone in Akatsuki organization was proud and arrogant, and this was a place where strength was the most important thing. There was no such thing as seniority. And Kisame didn't think that he was worse than Orochimaru. After all, he was the one who saved his life from Dustless, even if the other side completely let him win. What did you say? When Orochimaru heard this, the corners of his mouth twitched fiercely, and the smile he squeezed out suddenly froze. His expression changed constantly and he looked at Brother Shark with an unkind expression. He didn't expect this kid to say this. Isn't this saying that Orochimaru's name? It was equivalent to slapping him in the face, and it was the loudest kind of slap. Orochimaru. Uchiha Itachi turned his head casually, raised his eyelids and looked at Orochimaru faintly, then turned his head without looking at Orochimaru and said calmly, I have nothing to say to you. Is that so? That's a pity. Hearing this, Orochimaru didn't get angry but laughed instead. The corners of his mouth curled up into a scary smile, and his snake eyes flickered with a sly light. He pretended to sigh and said with pity, I thought you would be interested in that man, but now it seems that I thought too much. After saying that, Orochimaru turned around and left without stopping at all. His back was exceptionally free and straightforward. Although I don't know what you are planning, it doesn't matter if I go with you. I also have something to ask you. Itachi's eyes fell on Orochimaru and he followed him indifferently. He knew that Orochimaru must be planning something, but he also had something to ask Orochimaru. Itachi, I'm afraid that Orochimaru is after your Sharingan. Watching Itachi leave with Orochimaru, Kisame whispered to Itachi and rationally analyzed, I was lucky to see him in the Third War. That guy has always been obsessed with Uchiha Dustless. I guess he wants you because of your identity as Uchiha Dustless's younger brother and of course your Sharingan. Looking at Orochimaru's back with disdain, Kisame continued, I advise you not to go. Orochimaru is ambitious and he joined the Akatsuki for that. It doesn't matter, Uchiha Itachi chuckled and stared at Kisame. His eyes flashed with a strange light and he looked at him with admiration. Sure enough, you can't judge a book by its cover. This man who gave people the first impression of a rough man was, in fact, a man with a meticulous mind. What Kisame said was naturally the Rinnegan, because Orochimaru coveted the Rinnegan, so he attacked Yahiko, but he wasn't Yahiko's opponent and was defeated by him, so he joined the Akatsuki. As the saying goes, it's hard to change one's nature. Orochimaru was a man who pursued strength and the Rinnegan. The sudden appearance of Uchiha Itachi gave Orochimaru a new prey. Don't worry about Kisame, he doesn't have the ability to take me down. A warm current flowed through Itachi's cold heart, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He knew that Gonpei Kisame was thinking for him, but he was also confident that not only was he not Orochimaru's prey, but Orochimaru was his prey. Itachi's pupils were cold and he decisively followed. He knew that Orochimaru was after him, but if he could drive Orochimaru out of the Akatsuki, and let him lose the invisible umbrella of the Akatsuki, it's not a bad thing for Konoha's ninja village. At least without the protection of the Akatsuki, Orochimaru would never be as ostentatious as he was now, and at least he would stay hidden and consolidate his power in the future. Chapter 173. On the ancient steps, Uchiha Itachi walked alone with a calm expression. Behind him was Orochimaru, whose face was pale and whose eyes were shining from time to time. Uchiha Itachi, no matter what it takes, I will get your Sharingan and your body. Orochimaru narrowed his eyes slightly, secretly looking at Itachi's body. The more he looked, the more satisfied he was, and his heart was uncontrollable. Orochimaru seemed to be blinded by lard and lost his mind. A thick and long python drilled out of his left arm uncontrollably, spitting out scarlet tongue. The scarlet bloody mouth was wide open at Itachi, and a subtle hissing sound could be heard. Obviously, Orochimaru was impatient. Whoosh. In the end, Orochimaru couldn't suppress his greed. His eyes flashed with a touch of ruthlessness, and the giant earth-colored snake on his left arm went straight to Itachi's waist. An unprecedented force wrapped around Uchiha Itachi tightly. It wrapped around him for more than a dozen times before it stopped. It looked at Itachi with a ferocious expression, hissing and spitting out its long tongue. It circled around Itachi, which was particularly scary and gloomy. However, Itachi didn't turn his head from beginning to end. Orochimaru was behind him as if he was invisible. "Can you answer my question now, Orochimaru?" Looking at the blue sky in front of him, Itachi said calmly. He already knew that Orochimaru didn't have good intentions. The only thing he didn't expect was that Orochimaru would be so anxious. Although it was somewhat unexpected, it was also within Itachi's expectations. "Answer your question? Is your brain not enough? You are my prey now and you have been successfully caught. Do you think I need to answer your so-called question? In this world, the strong have the final say." Orochimaru sneered at Itachi, who was bound by the snake in front of him. His pale face showed disdain and contempt. Itachi had been successfully caught by him and the so-called question didn't exist. It was his freedom to answer it or not. In other words, suddenly turned his head, revealing half of his face. Looking at the proud Orochimaru, Itachi said coldly, "As long as I defeat you, I can answer my question. It's too easy." After that, Itachi's eyes suddenly turned scarlet, staring at the sky in front of him, and strong evil fluctuations surged out of his eyes. "Too easy?" Orochimaru's face suddenly collapsed. Not to mention that he had already subdued Itachi, he was also one of the former Sannin. Now that Itachi said that it was too easy to defeat him, how could he be calm? He couldn't help but want to teach Itachi a lesson. This is Orochimaru, who was about to teach Uchiha Itachi a lesson, suddenly found that he couldn't move at all. His body seemed to be forced into a chisel and he couldn't move at all. Just like the previous Haiden, Orochimaru couldn't help but break out in cold sweat. Golden Bind Genjutsu. Damn it. Looking at Itachi with a pale face, Orochimaru cursed in his heart. He was particularly depressed. He had warned himself to pay attention to Itachi's genjutsu, but he didn't expect that he would still fall for it unknowingly. If it wasn't for Itachi, he wouldn't even be aware of it. This shows how terrible Itachi's genjutsu is. Under these eyes, any jutsu you use will be seen through. The serpent binding Itachi's body also disappeared. Itachi turned around and stared at Orochimaru, who was sweating in cold sweat, and said in a casual tone, as if what he did was not worth mentioning. "So that's how it is, worthy of being Dustless Kuin's younger brother. I really can't underestimate him." Orochimaru tried his best to control the hand seals, and when he was about to launch a ninjutsu to break the binding of the genjutsu, a cold light suddenly appeared in front of him. Puchi. Orochimaru's left arm was suddenly cut off like cutting vegetables, and dark red blood spurted out of the wound, just like Orochimaru's personality. "Tell me, what do you know about that man? You should have teamed up with him to deal with the ninjas of the Rock Village. You know a lot of secrets that people don't know. You'd better tell me everything, otherwise I don't mind making you confess everything in the world of the Manjikyu Sharingan." The Sharingan of 3 Tomo Sharingan was instantly formed, and the pitch-black windmill was clearly visible. The fluctuation of eye power was more than 10 times stronger than the previous 3 Tomo Sharingan. What a powerful eye power. Orochimaru's face changed slightly when he saw this, and he lowered his head and pondered. When he used genjutsu to bind him, Itachi's pupils were clearly 3 Tomo Sharingan, and now they have become Manjikyu Sharingan, which means that it will be more difficult to deal with than before. "Tell me everything you know, or I don't mind letting you have a taste of Tsukuyami." Looking down at Orochimaru's eyes coldly, Itachi said coldly, and at the same time, a horrible murderous aura overflowed from his body and shrouded Orochimaru's body. The cold murderous aura stabbed Orochimaru like a blade, causing him to feel a tingling sensation on his skin. What a strong murderous aura. "But do you think you can kill me like this? You're too naive anyway. I'm one of the 3 Sannin Oru, so don't get carried away, kid of the Uchiha clan." Orochimaru's pale and sweaty face suddenly became ferocious, his neck elongated like a rubber, and he bit towards Itachi in the distance like a vicious beast. The corner of his mouth revealed sharp fangs, and even the corner of his mouth overflowed with disgusting saliva. At this moment, Orochimaru looked like a giant snake and he didn't look like a human. Compared with Uchiha Dustless, you're still too far away, kid. Chapter 174. Itachi's Manjikyu Sharingan froze as he looked at the oncoming snake head indifferently. His face was expressionless as he cast a pitiful look at Orochimaru. Amaterasu. As Itachi's voice fell, a black flame suddenly appeared on Orochimaru's head. The inextinguishable ghost fire swallowed Orochimaru's entire head. It seemed that he would die without a doubt. Orochimaru should be dead now. Zetsu and Dustless stood side by side in the distance, especially when they saw the black flame on Orochimaru's head. White Zetsu's tone seemed to be filled with unprecedented joy, and he couldn't wait for Orochimaru to die early. It's reasonable for White Zetsu to think so. After all, Amaterasu is known as the strongest physical attack. Not everyone can use the Tensigan or Rinnegan to absorb Amaterasu like Dustless. For ordinary people, Amaterasu is a dead end. Not everyone can use Yin-Yang release to nullify Amaterasu, at least Orochimaru can't. Orochimaru is not so fragile. If Amaterasu can kill him, maybe he would have died many years ago. How can Itachi kill him? Dustless shook his head and denied. Even if Orochimaru is not Itachi's opponent, if he was killed by Amaterasu, Orochimaru, one of the Sannin, would have died long ago. Ka. The black flame that swallowed Orochimaru's head suddenly made a crisp sound, and then the black flame fell and Orochimaru's head was still intact. Is this molting? Looking at the intact Orochimaru, Itachi frowned slightly, and then looked at the ground swallowed by the black flame, and his eyes flashed with a touch of understanding. How can this be? White Zetsu was speechless. He didn't expect that Orochimaru could escape Amaterasu by molting. Even the silent black Zetsu looked at the black flame on the ground. Wuxia didn't care. He was extremely indifferent, because Uchiha Sasuke used substitution jutsu to escape Uchiha Itachi's Amaterasu in the later stage. In fact, it was not much different from the way of molting in front of him. There's no reason why Orochimaru can't do it. Kusanagi sword. Orochimaru suddenly spat out a sharp tachi from his mouth, flashing with a scorching light. This tachi gave off a feeling of extreme sharpness, and even the light reflected from the tachi could pierce people's eyes. Stupid Argu, I should have told you just now that under these eyes, any jutsu you use will be seen through. No matter what kind of jutsu you use, it won't work, even the most basic one. Itachi said faintly. He didn't hide, he's and let's head swords. Clang. Itachi, spotty. His bodies is his left. Kudens, send, that was these bodies, and raps, this is. Eraser retracted his head, and Orochimaru's pupils suddenly shrank as he stared at the crimson skeleton that he had never seen before. Feeling the fluctuations of the evil chakra on it, a sense of powerlessness rose in his heart. Looks like I won't be able to take over his entire body. Orochimaru's eyes flashed with sadness and he sighed in disappointment. Soon after, he spread out his huge perception in all direction, and perceived several figures rushing towards him. He knew that today he would have to stop here and leave Akatsuki for good. One day I will have to take over your body. Orochimaru looked at Itachi reluctantly. Of course, most of his eyes were on Itachi's Manjikyu Sharingan. If he wasn't forced by the situation, Orochimaru wouldn't mind fighting him to the death. However, Akatsuki's people had already noticed this and were rushing over from all directions. Bang! Just as Orochimaru's voice fell, his body suddenly emitted white smoke and disappeared without a trace. Obviously, he used extremely fast body flicker jutsu to slip away. After all, he couldn't fight against all the members of Akatsuki. Orochimaru betrayed us just like that. He really can't be trusted. Noticing that Orochimaru disappeared like a ghost, Dustless said with a smile. From his frivolous and playful tone, it was not difficult to know that he already expected Orochimaru to defect. Dustless was calm as usual. Orochimaru defected from Akatsuki at this time, and then Itachi, Kisame, and Sasori went to Rock Village to defeat Deidara and forced him to join Akatsuki. This guy seems to be able to predict everything. Black Zetsu's single eye secretly peeped at Dustless, thinking about his deeds. Not only now but also in the past he could always predict everything in advance. It was really strange. What are you thinking, Black Zetsu? Half of Black Zhu's body suddenly stiffened. He raised his head and suddenly saw Wu Chen looking at him with a smile. Wu Chen's indifferent eyes saw through everything with endless ridicule, as if he could see through everything. Black Zhu's body immediately broke out in cold sweat. There was an indescribable feeling in his heart. Just now it was as if thousands of years of secrets were peeped by Wu Chen. Orochimaru has defected. I am thinking about who is suitable to replace him. After a short period of absent-mindedness, Black Zetsu said calmly. After thousands of years of dormancy, experiencing countless ups and downs, Black Zetsu's heart has long been as tough as iron, and his pupils were abnormally calm. He said softly to Dustless. This old guy's reaction is quite fast. Dustless sneered again and again. His visual capture ability was extremely strong. Even the slightest flaw of Black Zetsu couldn't escape his eyes. Even if he concealed it very quickly, he still caught the flaw of Black Zetsu. Although for the current Dustless, killing Black Zetsu is almost as simple as eating and drinking water, but now is obviously not the best time, and even if he kills Black Zetsu he needs to use Rinnegan or Tensegan to extract his memory. Chapter 175. Orochimaru's defection is indeed troublesome. At present the number of members of the Akatsuki has just been gathered. Now that Orochimaru suddenly left, the morale will inevitably be hit, which is tantamount to directly slapping Pain's face. The members of the Akatsuki quickly rushed over and saw the scene of the previous battle and the residual chakra energy fluctuations in the air. They all frowned slightly. Obviously there was an unusually fierce battle before, and the missing Orochimaru should belong to the defeated party, especially the broken arm that was still bleeding on the ground. Obviously it was Orochimaru's. Damn Orochimaru. After listening to Uchiha Itachi's story, Pain's face was blue. The majestic murderous aura was vast and infinite. Like a hurricane, the cold air froze the surrounding flowers and trees. Looking at Orochimaru's broken arm, he raised his hand and shot out a fiery red light, turning it into ashes. Perceiving Pain's violent and restless momentum, the Akatsuki members' faces changed. This boss who rarely shows his strength is so fierce. Of course it is not ruled out that Pain is deliberately showing off. What should we do with Orochimaru? He knows a lot of secrets in the organization. As Orochimaru's teammate, Sasori asked in a deep voice. He used to work with Orochimaru, so he knew Orochimaru's temperament very well. If he is left alone, it is definitely raising a tiger, and one day he will be caught in a cocoon. Kakuzu and I will kill him. I have long been unhappy with that disgusting snake. This kind of task is the most suitable for Master Haiden, right Kakuzu? Indeed. Looking at the excited Haiden beside him, Kakuzu nodded this time. For him, money is more important than anything. Orochimaru's head is worth a lot of money in the black market. Killing a defected ninja in the organization and making a lot of money, by the way. Kakuzu has no reason to refuse this kind of thing. Don't worry about Orochimaru for the time being. He should know that disclosing the secrets of the organization to the world will lead to a miserable end. Orochimaru is a smart person. He won't do such a stupid thing. After pondering for a long time, Pain calmly analyzed. Orochimaru had already joined the Akatsuki for some time. If he didn't open his eyes and expose the secrets of the Akatsuki to the world, he believed that even if he didn't do it himself, the two masked men behind the scenes would talk to Orochimaru. The two masked men were undoubtedly Dustless and Obito. It seems that I have to find someone to replace Orochimaru. Yahiko looked around and felt a headache coming on. It's not easy to find a powerful S-class ninja without a fixed organization. After so many years he only found a few in front of him, and they were all rebellious ninjas. Looks like I can only give him a headache. On second thought, Yahiko passed the ball to Uchiha Obito, because Kisame and Itachi were introduced into the Akatsuki through Uchiha Obito. This is interesting. Seeing that Akatsuki was paralyzed because of the lack of manpower, Dustless, who was quietly observing in the dark, suddenly smiled. A brand new plan suddenly emerged in his mind, and after a short calculation he felt that it was feasible and could be considered a good plan. Dustless Sama means. Looking at Dustless in confusion, White Zetsu said in a daze. Dustless's thinking was too fast and he couldn't keep up with the rhythm. You're the only one in the world who knows that the masked man is Dustless Uchiha. Even Obito doesn't know about this, but even if they don't know, I think they've already suspected me. Dustless said with a strange smile. I mean, even if Obito and Uzumaki Nagato didn't say anything, I'm afraid they've already suspected that I'm the masked man, including Uchiha Itachi. Dustless was open-minded about this. Uchiha Madara's Eye of the Moon plan was full of mistakes, let alone him. If it wasn't for Obito's help behind the scenes to perfect the plan, I'm afraid the so-called Eye of the Moon would have already collapsed. In other words, no plan designed by anyone is perfect, even gods are no exception. Even if Black Zetsu finally succeeded in resurrecting Kaguya, I'm afraid he didn't expect that Uzumaki Naruto and Uchiha Sasuke would seal Kaguya again. It's very likely that they may have guessed that the masked man is Dustless Sama. Black Zetsu nodded slowly. Uzumaki Nagato and Uchiha Obito were not easy to deal with, and Uzumaki Nagato and Uchiha Obito were very close in the past 2 years. Maybe the two have exchanged their opinions with each other. In that case, why don't I jump out directly? With a scornful smile on his face, Dustless said directly. No matter what, Sun Wukong will never jump out of Gautama Buddha's palm. This world can't jump out of the palm of Dustless's hand. Dustless, Sama, do you want to expose your identity? White Zetsu asked doubtfully. Looking at Dustless's appearance, he wanted to jump from behind the scenes to the front, which means that the previous plan may be completely aborted. I kind of understand Dustless Sama's meaning. Black Zetsu was worthy of being an old fox who lived for thousands of years. After a moment of silence, he immediately understood Dustless's intention and nodded uncontrollably, thinking that it was feasible. Dustless's face was frozen and his eyes were shining. Since Uchiha Obito, Uzumaki Nagato, and Uchiha Itachi have secretly guessed that he is the masked man, it's better to jump to the front and in front of them. Uchiha Kagami will replace the masked man and secretly control Uchiha Obito and the Akatsuki. From then on, the masked man will be Uchiha Kagami. The masked man will be replaced by Uchiha Kagami, and Uchiha Dustless will jump to the front and join the Akatsuki, completely clearing the suspicion that the masked man is Uchiha Dustless. Chapter 176. 3 days later, in the Rain Village, in the misty rain, in a dirty room, two isolated figures could be clearly seen. It was Pain and Uchiha Obito with a mask. This is really tricky, damn Orochimaru, he should know what to do and what not to do. Obito whispered to himself with a little bit of killing intent. If Orochimaru really dared to reveal the purpose of the Akatsuki, he wouldn't mind personally destroying his nest. Let's find a new member first. Orochimaru's matter can be temporarily put aside. Obito pondered and sighed silently. He couldn't think of a suitable person to replace Orochimaru. It's better to look for him. Seeing that Obito didn't have a suitable candidate, Yahiko suggested gloomily. No matter when, his voice always gave a very gloomy and heavy feeling. The him in his mouth was naturally the masked man Dustless. We can only ask him. Obito nodded silently, and just as he was about to activate his Kamui and leave, Dustless, who rarely shows up, suddenly appeared like a ghost. Unexpectedly, there was a young man with delicate features following behind him. Long time no see, Nagato. The masked man stared at Yahiko with a black iron rod, and his face was filled with a pleasant smile. His tone was the same as the first time they met a few years ago. Nagato, who was controlling Yahiko, was slightly stunned and immediately nodded. Who is that? Looking at the hazy figure hidden in the darkness, Obito frowned and then looked at the masked man with displeasure. Obviously he was very dissatisfied with this approach. He suddenly brought an inexplicable person, especially when he didn't know whether this person was an enemy or a friend. He is the one who is about to replace Orochimaru, the new member of the Akatsuki, Uchiha Dustless. At this moment the masked man was Uchiha Kagami. He and Dustless were quite similar in stature, and the tone of voice and the use of jutsu were exactly the same. He was also wearing a mask, so he didn't arouse Obito and Pain's suspicion. Yo! A young man walked out of the darkness with a smile on his face. His appearance was similar to Itachi's. He looked very young, in his 20s. He smiled at Obito and Yahiko, giving off a very gentle feeling. How could it be him? Then who is this masked man? After being stunned for a while, Obito roared in his heart, and looked at Dustless's smiling face with uncertainty. A long time ago, Obito suspected that the masked man was Uchiha Dustless. Especially when he destroyed Konoha, his strength made him suspect Dustless, but the scene in front of him completely subverted his inference. Sure enough, Obito already guessed that it was me. But it's still too early for you to fight with me. Seeing the look of disbelief in Obito's eyes, Dustless laughed in his heart. He can be sure that this kid's heart is in a mess right now. I'm afraid that he's trying to figure out who this masked man is. Dustless, who has both the Tensigen and the Rinnegan, has a far better control of the Inyang release than others. The masked Uchiha Kagami in front of him was like a normal human, breathing and heartbeat. The only difference is that his consciousness was controlled by Dustless. I didn't expect you to still be alive. Yahiko looked at Dustless with indifference. After a few years he still couldn't forget Dustless. It was Dustless who defeated him, Yahiko and Conan. Fortunately, Uchiha Madara saved him in order to prevent the plan from failing, otherwise he would have died a long time ago. From now on he will replace Orochimaru and form a team with Sasori of the Red Sand. Uchiha Kagami's voice was indifferent. He was too lazy to explain more to Dustless, just like Dustless's usual style. There is no problem with this. Obito and Yahiko looked at each other and couldn't help but nod. Dustless's strength was beyond doubt, especially Yahiko, who knew Dustless's strength better. Many years ago he could easily crush the three of them. His strength was even better than his own Rinnegan. Obito nodded and didn't choose to ask more. Now he was just thinking about who the masked man in front of him was. After all, Dustless, who he suspected to be the masked man, has come out, so the masked man in front of him was obviously someone else. As for the problem of Uchiha Wuchin, it's just a trivial matter. Yahiko welcomed Dustless to join the Akatsuki. This way not only can they solve the population problem, but they can also get a free super strong fighting force, killing two birds with one stone. A month later in the gloomy cave there was no light all year round. The coldness and darkness were the most realistic portrayals of this place. In the depths of the cave one could see a blurry, tall shadow. It was about 10 meters tall and its entire body was covered in uneven protrusions. It was especially terrifying. There were 10 cylindrical protrusions on its back, and its wounds were as smooth as if they had been cut off. It made one's imagination run wild. Especially when one looked up and saw that the giant had 9 huge eyes, it invisibly added a lot of fear. It was the Geto Mazo. A few years ago, Dustless gave the Geto Mazo to Uzumaki Nagato. Anyway, he didn't need it for the time being, so he gave it to the embryonic form of the Akatsuki. Of course, the Geto Mazo also sealed the Kyubi's In attribute chakra. Looking around, the Geto Mazo opened its hands and 9 figures stood on its 10 huge fingers. All of them were wearing black trench coats embroidered with strange and dazzling red clouds. This time it wasn't like the usual where all the members of the Akatsuki showed up in their original form. Including Uchiha Itachi, Pain and Conan, all the members of the Akatsuki showed up to greet the new members. Among them, the most unhappy were the zombie duo Kazu and Haiden. Chapter 177. The reason why Fei Duan and Kakuzu were the most upset was because the two of them had accepted a mission from the black market to earn extra money. Just as they were about to completely kill each other, they were forcibly recalled back because of Pain's order. Then Fei Duan and Kakuzu were quite dissatisfied. Especially Kakuzu, who loved money like his life. How could he not be angry when the cooked duck flew away? That newcomer's face is really big, he actually made us all wait for him. Haiden's voice sounded, obviously he was quite dissatisfied with this so-called newcomer. Although he was not as obsessed with money as Haiden, he enjoyed the process of fighting very much. Now that he was forcibly summoned by Pain, he was also holding back the anger in his heart. It seems that our S-class rebellious ninjas are becoming more and more worthless. Any random person who comes here needs us to greet him. Kakuzu complained, but when he could make a lot of money, it was interrupted by this newcomer, so naturally he didn't show the slightest mercy to this so-called newcomer. Although the other members of Akatsuki didn't speak, their faces were faintly showing some dissatisfaction. It would be ridiculous to say that one person made all of them come here once. Oh, I'm sorry to make you wait for me. Shizuka's laughter had a bit of banter, especially the frivolous and indifferent tone, which made Kakuzu's face collapse. His oily green eyes flashed with ominous light, and his whole body was filled with cold killing intent. With a murderous gaze, he looked at the place where the voice came from under the dark rock. After a few breaths of time, a handsome young man in his 20s came into view. His appearance was similar to Uchiha Itachi's, and he had a bright smile on his face. He didn't seem to fit in with the Akatsuki, an organization composed entirely of rebellious ninjas. Uchiha Dustless, it's you? The first one to speak was not Kisame, who had seen Dustless before and fought with him, but rather Konan, who had never spoken and was also the only female member of Akatsuki, who had an indifferent face like an angel. It's really him, it's impossible, he's already dead. Kisame looked at Dustless, who was in his 20s, and his face was gloomy. Although the last time he saw Dustless was a few years ago, he could never forget the appearance of Dustless in his life. Even if he grew up now, he could still recognize him at a glance. However, it was said that Uchiha Dustless was dead and he suddenly came back to life. Even with his beast-like ability to accept and adapt, he couldn't accept such a reality. He stopped thinking and looked at Dustless with a smile on his face, especially when the person in front of him was about to become his companion. The one with the most complicated thoughts was undoubtedly Uchiha Itachi. His 3-tomo Sharingan was like stagnant water. He was sure that the person in front of him, who he had never met before, was his big brother. The feeling of blood connection in his bones wouldn't lie. The Sand Village was defeated by him. Sasori also looked over and muttered to himself in surprise. Looking at Dustless, who was in his 20s, his pupils flashed with a strange color. He was a ninja who betrayed the Sand Village, so naturally he was curious about Dustless, who defeated the Sand Village. Everyone's heart was active, thinking about Dustless's past. Even the slightest details were not missed. Well, it's just another vase who knows how to play genjutsu. A disdainful sneer resounded. The owner of the voice was none other than Haydn, who looked at Dustless contemptuously with a proud and arrogant smile on his face. Obviously, he still held a grudge against Uchiha for being controlled by Uchiha's Sharingan last time, especially with the 3-section scythe on his shoulder. There was no doubt that he was looking for trouble. Reckless thing. Kisame's disdainful gaze swept past Haydn, cursing in his heart that they deserved to be called the zombie duo. Their brains are full of paste. Uchiha Dustless and he are not in the same dimension at all. However, Kisame was too lazy to meddle in other people's business. After all, a character like Haydn can't be persuaded easily, and he and Haydn are quite disagreeable. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to laugh at Haydn and see the strength of Uchiha Dustless. How can he easily let it go? I've heard that Haydn's brain is lacking a string, sure enough. Looking at Haydn and Kakuzu behind him without fear, Dustless was speechless. He just joined the Akatsuki and someone came out to slap his face. It's really bad luck. Let me see if you're just a vase who knows how to use Sharingan. Haydn sneered at Dustless, the 3-section scythe in his hand, and at the same time he turned his head and looked at the silent Uchiha Itachi. It was self-evident who he was talking about. Bring it on. Smiling casually, Dustless looked at Haydn without fear, and his thumb pointed at Haydn and Kakuzu, indicating the zombie duo to bring it on. A straight light flashed from his palm and quickly materialized, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into an extremely sharp Kusanagi sword. Courting death. The murderous light in Kakuzu's eyes suddenly shot out, and the murderous aura of his body swarmed out like a tide. He originally thought that Dustless was going to fight with Haydn, but he didn't expect that he would also fight with Haydn 1 against 2. It's simply outrageous, it's a slap in their faces. Since you two don't want to come, then I will. With a chuckle, Dustless's body lost its texture and flashed with a dazzling light, which was very conspicuous in the dark cave. The light body turned into a straight golden light and went straight out, disappearing in an instant. So fast. The members of the Akatsuki were stunned, and even the calm Uchiha Itachi's face changed slightly, and he frowned. His big brother was indeed a bit evil. Only Pain, Konan and Kisame could keep their faces unchanged, and only Pain, who fought with Dustless in the past. Chapter 178. Seeing Dustless suddenly and strangely disappear, Fei Duan and Jiao were both stunned. Immediately in the dark space, a cold light suddenly streaked across the air. Fei Duan almost instinctively picked up the red 3-section scythe in his hand to block. Clang! The buzzing sound of the collision of steel resounded, and the sparks were particularly dazzling. Through the faint light that disappeared in a flash, they could clearly see Dustless with a smile on his face. It seemed that he was surprised that Haydn could resist his attack, and there were faint ripples in his pupils. This guy. What a powerful force. Feeling the tremendous power imparted by the scarlet scythe, Fei Duan's expression changed drastically. He sucked in a breath of cold air and revealed a look of astonishment and shock. In that instant of confrontation, his arm was shaken to the point of numbness. Because he couldn't withstand the impact of the tremendous power, his body was forced back several steps before he could barely withstand the slash. "Do you even put me in your eyes?" A cold and hoarse voice sounded, and then there was a shrill sound. Looking up, they saw a flash of lightning appearing in the palm of Kokuzu. They could clearly see the silver lightning dagger. Whoosh! The sound of a whistling sound sounded, and then they saw the silver dagger whistling through the air. The crackling sound of thunder obviously showed that this ninjutsu was not simple, and it wanted to penetrate Dustless's chest. Insignificant skill. Wu Chen's tranquil eyes stared at the approaching blade light. He didn't move from the beginning to the end, quietly and calmly waiting for the arrival of the butcher's knife. His deep and bright eyes were calm and composed. His whole body was suffused with a golden luster as gentle as the sun, giving people a warm and serene feeling. Pretentious brat. Her nose wrinkled slightly, and there were some faint ripples in Conan's beautiful pupils. She immediately whispered in dissatisfaction. Even if Dustless was now an adult, perhaps her impression of him was still the brat from the beginning. Although Conan's voice was as soft as a mosquito, someone still heard it. Payne turned his head and looked at Conan in surprise. He immediately bowed his head and pondered. There was a faint light in the depths of his eyes, and then he recovered his calmness. The sharp silver light was about to penetrate Dustless. Looking at it, the sharp blade condensed by lightning went straight through Dustless's body. The thunder-long blade was like a stone in the sea. Dustless's body was covered with golden waves, and he immediately shuttled through it. On the other side, Haydn was bloody unlucky. Poochie! A piercing pain spread throughout his body and scarlet blood splashed out. Fei Duan subconsciously touched his chest and reached out to touch it. Then he raised his hand and stared blankly at the crimson blood in his hand. The corner of his mouth twitched violently, and a shrill scream that sounded like a pig being slaughtered resounded throughout the cave, echoing for a long time. "Kazu, you old bastard, did you do it on purpose?" Fei Duan was so angry that he was trembling. His face kept twitching as he looked at Kokuzu. His gloomy eyes were clearly saying, "Even if I'm immortal, you can't test my body so casually. You'll be ruined. This is an accidental injury. I didn't expect him to have such a strange ability." Kokuzu's face was gloomy and he argued with a red face. It's okay to be despised by others, but if he was looked at by Haydn's gloomy eyes, Kokuzu would feel uncomfortable all over, even if it was his fault. Haydn looked at Kokuzu gloomily when he heard this. If it weren't for his immortal body, he would have already died. Now is not the time for you two to exchange feelings. The scarlet Sharingan appeared, and the deep blood-red tomo was like rolling condensed blood, full of ominous. The blood-red light flashing in the darkness was particularly gloomy, and the powerful eye power made people palpitate. Gulp. What a terrifying eye. Haydn's soul was throbbing under the gaze of the scarlet tomo, and his throat twitched up and down. Suddenly he remembered Itachi's method of controlling him last time, and subconsciously closed his eyes. However, it was too late. Boom. The powerful eye power directly poured into Fei Duan's mind, controlling his thoughts. His eyes became dull and lifeless, and the sharp sickle in his hand fell to the ground, splashing up a cloud of dust. He felt like a walking corpse that had been stripped of his inner soul. Why does the 3-tomo Sharingan have such great eye power? Itachi frowned slightly as he glanced at Wuchen from the corner of his eyes. Obviously the Sharingan has 3-tomo Sharingan, but it gives people the feeling of a Mangekyo. Yo! But Dustless apparently noticed Itachi's gaze, and he also looked at Itachi on the finger of the Geto Mazo, showing a gentle smile, giving people a warm feeling. Seeing this, Itachi was slightly stunned, and then he nodded and a strange feeling rose in his heart. He felt that Dustless's motives were not pure, and he began to be secretly vigilant. Even if this person was his brother, he couldn't let it go. Hypocritical man. Conan naturally saw Dustless's expression, and she who didn't like Dustless, naturally snorted, especially that ordinary smile made her particularly uncomfortable. Seeing that Haydn was instantly KO'd, Kakuzu's mouth twitched fiercely, and when he was about to sneak attack Dustless, Pain, who was usually silent, suddenly stopped this boring duel. "It's over, Kazu." Looking at the murderous Kazu, Pain then looked at the unconscious Haydn with pity and shook his head slightly. Maybe the Sharingan is this kid's nemesis and he lost twice under the Sharingan. Break his genjutsu. Glancing at Dustless casually, Pain's tone was indifferent, and there was a faint will that could not be violated. Maybe after all these years he has really regarded himself as a special godlike existence. "I'll let you be cocky for a while." Dustless couldn't help muttering in his heart, and at the same time looking at the half-dead Haydn, he put away the scarlet-red tomo and broke Haydn's genjutsu. Chapter 179. Opening his eyes in a trance, Haydn looked at the world in front of him like a child who had just woken up, and what he saw was the old face of Kakuzu. "Stand up quickly after making a fool of yourself, don't make me lose face with you." Kakuzu scolded Haydn with a gloomy expression. He was the most senior member of the Akatsuki. After all, he was an old antique who was almost 100 years old, and was a contemporary of the first Hokage Senju Hashirama. "Where did that kid go? Look at me, Uncle Haydn." "Shut up." Kakuzu glared fiercely at Fei Dan, then looked away and silently returned to his original position on the Geto statue's finger. Fei Dan tactfully followed Kakuzu back. Uchiha Dustless. Looking at Dustless expressionlessly, Pain's calm eyes flickered with faint ripples. After a moment of silence, he finally made a shocking decision. "From today on, you are one of the members of the Akatsuki organization." Throwing the black trench coat embroidered with red clouds to Dustless, Pain stopped, but he didn't intend to give the blue ring to Dustless. "Serves you right, kid." Seeing this scene, Haydn laughed secretly. "I'm afraid that Dustless is the most miserable one in the history of the Akatsuki. He doesn't have a ring that represents his status as a member of the Akatsuki organization." But soon Haydn's eyes widened as he looked at Pain's action in disbelief, and his breathing stopped. Looking thoughtfully at the silent Sasori, Pain withdrew his gaze and immediately looked at Xiao Nan, who was as cold as an iceberg. Xiao Nan's pretty face had an unapproachable expression. His eyes flashed with a touch of decisiveness. He took off the ring with the word 0 on his finger and handed it to Wu Qin. Everyone was stunned. "From now on, your code name is 0, and this is the ring that represents your identity." Under the astonished gaze of everyone, Pain threw the ring in his hand to Dustless without hesitation, and looked at Dustless very seriously and indifferently said, "From now on, you and Conan are a team." Wu Qin frowned when he heard the words. His deep black pupils stared at Pain's stagnant eyes, and then a hint of understanding flashed in his eyes. "He is going to let Conan monitor me." Thinking quickly, Dustless quickly saw through Pain's plan. No one in the Akatsuki could be trusted, but only Conan was trustworthy, and it was not difficult to see that Pain didn't trust Dustless that much. Even if he was sent by the masked man, he sent Conan to monitor Dustless. Although 0, this ring represented the leader in a certain sense. But the members of Akatsuki organization couldn't possibly recognize Dustless as their boss just because this ring was given to Dustless. Conan was unusually calm and her performance was very calm. Without a doubt, she also saw through Pain's intention, and knew his motive for arranging her to secretly monitor Dustless. Although she hated Dustless, but regarding Pain's command, Conan still chose to obey without hesitation. Scorpio, on the other hand, was quite calm. For him, it didn't matter if he had teammates or not. If he didn't like them, he would kill them all the same. Out of sight, out of mind. In short, Akatsuki organization gathered all kinds of freaks, whether it was their strength or their character, they were all like this. As for Sasori's teammate, I have already found a candidate. Looking at Sasori, Pain continued to say, Deidara of the Rock Village is a good candidate, but that kid's character seems to be a bit hard. This time Itachi, Kisame, Sasori, Conan and Dustless, you 5 will tame him. Deidara was now young, but his reputation was already known. When he was 9 years old, he was forced to leave the village because he often caused terrorist incidents. He was the disciple of the 3rd generation Tsuchikage Anoki. Now he was 12 years old and his strength was far stronger than 3 years ago. It seems that there is a difficult task for him to join for the first time. That explosive clay maniac is very difficult to deal with. I heard that because he is too dangerous, Anoki sent him to a place where there are few people. The one who spoke was naturally dustless. He smiled and explained to the members of the Akatsuki. The only thing that made people frown was that his smile was like a cunning fox. Indeed. Pain nodded. He seemed surprised that Dustless knew about Deidara. Even if Deidara was now famous, he was still not worth mentioning to Dustless. Can he really be trusted? Sasori said with some doubts. It was really difficult for him to team up with a kid who was nearly 12 years old. Even if Itachi was only 13.5 years old, he couldn't eliminate the doubts in his heart. Perhaps Kisame also had doubts about this before he saw Uchiha Itachi. Pain's eyes flashed with hesitation. Deidara's strength was acceptable, but it didn't mean that other aspects were acceptable. For example, personality to some extent was the opposite of Deidara. Deidale and Sasori of the Red Sand both pursue the so-called art. They are the same people, but the difference is also the difference between heaven and earth. Deidale pursues the art of the moment, while Sasori of the Red Sand pursues the art of eternity. This was the biggest difference between heaven and earth. It was inevitable that there would be quarrels. With Sasori's temperament, he might really make Deidara a puppet. Let's go to the rock village first. Seeing that Pain was hesitant, Dustless suggested tentatively. Deidale was still very compatible with Scorpio of the Red Sand. Even if there was a quarrel, Scorpio of the Red Sand may not be able to kill Deidale. Pain nodded when he heard this. Could only be like this. Whether it was suitable or not, only by meeting them will they know. Chapter 180. On the path in the dense forest, two isolated figures were slowly moving forward. Their black trench coats were embroidered with red clouds. One of them was obviously a woman, with dark blue hair and a lavender paper flower on the right side of her head. Her delicate and dignified appearance was filled with endless indifference. It was Conan. The tall young man beside her was a head taller than Conan. His slightly messy but neat hair fluttered in the wind from time to time, adding a little wild and unruly feeling. Who else could it be but Dustless? Dustless was particularly conspicuous in his black trench coat. The front of his fingers was painted black and purple, and he wore a wooden hat with some bells. As the breeze blew, the white ribbon tied to the bamboo hat would dance in the wind, and the bell on it would also let out a crisp silver bell sound. Time flew by. 3 days had already passed since the last short gathering. During this period of time, Dustless and Conan had also formed a brand new combination of God's Messenger. There was no need to doubt that they were absolutely the most powerful combination in the Akatsuki organization. Although Conan didn't like Dustless, she put down the grudge in her heart and chose to obey Uzumaki Nagato's arrangement. She formed a team with Dustless to monitor Dustless, and also to borrow his strength to help the Akatsuki organization collect several tailed beasts as soon as possible. As if thinking of something, Conan's footsteps suddenly stopped. Looking at Dustless's back, she was puzzled. What's wrong? Noticing that Xiaonan had stopped her footsteps, Wuxia, who had turned his head, slightly wrinkled his brows, and puzzledly looked at Xiaonan. He always felt that this woman was weird. If it wasn't for entering Akatsuki to do as the Romans do, he really didn't want to team up with this woman to do mission. Conan's eyes stared at Dustless and suddenly asked, "Who was the mysterious person who stopped you?" Dustless's strength was obvious to all. Even Uzumaki Nagato, who had Rinnegan, was no match for him. Who could stop Dustless? Conan was naturally very curious. However, she was doomed to be disappointed. This has nothing to do with you. After entering Akatsuki, there's no rule that says you have to report your private matters. Dustless glanced at the confused Xiaonan and withdrew his gaze. He turned around and walked away, leaving Xiaonan alone. The mysterious person that Conan was talking about was naturally Uchiha Madara. Perhaps it wasn't him who organized Dustless. Maybe Conan, Uzumaki Nagato, and Yahiko were mercilessly killed many years ago. You're so strong but so petty. Xiaonan looked at Dustless, who was leaving, and rolled her eyes. She immediately followed Dustless. She and Dustless were now in the Oracle team, so they naturally had to carry out the mission together. On the peak of the mountain, Three indistinct figures flickered in and out of existence as they stared at the huge village in front of them. Behind them, a strong cold wind whistled past, accompanied by endless sand and dust. It was like a sandstorm blowing up their robes. Too slow, dustless. Sasori of the red sand turned his head and looked discontentedly at Dustless, who had just arrived. His voice was full of displeasure. He was most annoyed with the kind of person who made him waste time. Sorry. Shrugging his shoulders, Wuxia said to Sasori, Kisame, and Uchiha Itachi apologetically. Haha, I'm sorry. He and Conan belonged to the last group to set off. Originally he wanted to take Conan to go faster, but she firmly disagreed. Dustless also rushed with her, which delayed them for a few hours. It's really a bad place with bad weather. Kisame looked around and frowned slightly after seeing the endless sandstorm. Perhaps he was born as a shark, so he preferred water. It was particularly unsuitable for the dry environment of the rock village. Yes. Itachi nodded. The climate of the rock village was really bad. He immediately looked at Dustless secretly, and a faint ripple appeared in his pupils. He closed his eyes again and began to think. The feeling that Wuxia gave him was not that kind of simple danger. It was like a giant beast hiding in the deep sea. Although it seemed that if you did not provoke it, it would not take the initiative to attack you. It was very gentle. However, no one knew when this giant beast with a bloody mouth would secretly attack you. When the sawtooth opened, it might be the time of life and death. This kind of person was often the most dangerous. It was fine if he didn't take action, but if he did, he would have a 90% chance of succeeding. In other words, Wuxia was the kind of person who was careful and wouldn't take any risks casually. While the few of them were deep in thought, Xiaonan finally arrived. Well, the so-called oracle team is just Esu. Seeing Xiaonan come, Sasori of the red sand immediately ridiculed her. Because of Xiaonan and Wuxia, the three of them were attacked by the sandstorm for a few hours. Well, let's go find that kid. Wuxia chuckled. Although he didn't care about this so-called oracle combination, Xiaonan, who was beside him with a pale face, didn't think so. Perhaps in Conan's view, this was Sasori challenging the authority of the former pain. Let's go find Deidara first. As for other insignificant things, let's talk about it later. Seeing that Xiaonan and Sasori of the red sand had signs of a fight, Wuxia spoke to stop them. At the same time, his whole body was covered with a golden luster, like a divine rainbow cutting through the void. He went straight toward the giant village in front of him, and disappeared in the blink of an eye. It's still the same terrifying speed, it hasn't changed at all. Looking at the golden rainbow that cut the sky, Hoshigaki Kisame laughed bitterly at himself, and suddenly remembered that Dustless defeated him and Terumi Mei with overwhelming power, and his shark face was particularly complicated. Have you ever fought with him, Kisame? Uchiha Itachi asked curiously, and at the same time, it attracted the attention of Sasori and Conan, because Kisame's strength was obvious to all, and he was known as a humanoid-tailed beast. Hearing this, the bitterness on Kisame's face became more obvious, and he spread his hands, and his face was full of entanglement and helplessness. More than just fighting, if he didn't deliberately let me win, I would have died many years ago. Chapter 181. Kisame's face was full of emotion. If it weren't for Dustless holding back, he would have already died, let alone joining the Akatsuki. He clenched his huge fist tightly, but in the end he couldn't help but let it go. The self-deprecation on his thick face became clearer, and he subconsciously touched the scar on his face. Although it had completely disappeared after many years, there were still some traces left. It was also because of this reason that Kismet Ghost Shark trained himself even more crazily. He dreamed that one day, even if he couldn't surpass Wuxia, he would at least have the power to fight with him. Now it seemed that the gap between them hadn't narrowed at all. Instead, it had widened a lot. Sure enough, that man is as dangerous and mysterious as the masked man. Hearing this, Itachi's eyes were full of stormy waves and his face was unnatural. He naturally knew the strength of Kisame, and Dustless's strength was self-evident. Even if he fought against Dustless, he was afraid that it would be like a stone thrown into the sea, and he wouldn't be able to make much of a ripple. What did that guy do in the years after his death? Looking up slightly, looking at the straight beam of light that hadn't dissipated in the sky, Itachi bowed his head and thought. He really couldn't figure out what Dustless was planning in the past few years. However, there was one thing that was certain. During those few years when Dustless's secret disappeared, he was definitely doing secret things that no one knew about. My so-called big brother, what are you doing and what is your plan? Putting down his uneasy heart, Itachi's obsession with Dustless was even stronger than before. His eyes looked indifferently at the void in front of him, and then he disappeared in the direction where Dustless had disappeared. If I can turn those two brothers into my eternal works of art. Seeing that Dustless and Itachi had disappeared, Konan and Kisame also disappeared. Only Sasori, whose eyes were shining, was waiting quietly. He had seen the strength of Dustless and Itachi with his own eyes. If he could make them into puppets, their combat power would definitely double. While his heart was burning, Sasori's blazing expression suddenly froze, and his heart became cold. Uchiha Itachi was already a very difficult and powerful opponent. If Wuxia was added into the mix. For some reason, Sasori suddenly felt that if the two brothers were willing to cooperate with each other, the whole world would be theirs. In the empty lobby, countless iron giants with ghost eyes and fangs could be clearly seen. Their faces were terrible as ghosts, giving the feeling that they were demons from hell. 5 figures stood side by side, and Dustless, who came early, stood in the middle, seemed to be quietly waiting for someone to come. They began to close their eyes. Coming. Along with the voice of Wuxia, the members of Akatsuki organization opened their eyes one after another, and rather expectantly looked at the distant immature figure. Especially Sasori of Akatsuki, but seeing that toddler's shadow, his old face immediately collapsed. Are you kidding me? You want that kid to team up with me? Red Sand Scorpion's eyes immediately darkened. Everyone, including Dustless and Xiao Nan, furrowed their brows without a trace. Although Itachi was only 13.5 years old, at least he seemed to have thoroughly matured, and his childishness had faded, but the kid coming toward him was obviously jumping, giving the feeling that he had not grown up. Don't be impatient, you can't judge a book by its cover, let's wait and see. Glancing faintly at Sasori beside him, Wuxia calmly opened his mouth. Especially his eagle-like eyes emitted a cold light, which immediately made Sasori swallow back the words he was about to say. This guy gives people a terrible feeling. The corner of his eyes vaguely looked at Dustless, and Sasori said solemnly in his heart. Even if some people are strong, there will be a fixed boundary, and Dustless gave him a feeling like a person without any constraints, without any so-called boundary. I would like to see what's so different about him. Raising his cold eyes, Scorpio gloomily looked at the bouncing golden-haired brat in front of him. This brat's appearance coincided with the information. Obviously he was the so-called Deidara. Soon, the short and tender body stepped into the main hall. Who are you people without my permission who let you set foot here? Deidara looked at the unknown strangers in front of him, frowned slightly, and immediately said viciously. These people wore the same clothes and they obviously belonged to the same force. Thinking of what he had done in the past few years, Deidara's eyes were even more murderous. Because he accepted a lot of terrorist attacks, he offended a lot of people. These people in front of him may be hired killers. Who sent you here? Tell me, or don't even think about leaving this place alive. Looking at Dustless and the other 4 with hostility, Deidara's pupils were emitting a cold light, and at the same time, some white animals could be seen in his hand. They were strange creatures similar to spiders with many long legs. However, Dustless and the other 4 looked at this kid with a smile. This kid doesn't seem to understand the situation. Kisame stared at Deidara, who was full of murderous intent, and said very jokingly. Immediately he looked at the explosive clay in Deidara's hand and couldn't help but frown. This kid looks like he will die early. I really don't know what the leader sees in him. Sasori looked at Deidara disdainfully with a sneer on his face. He only thought that this kid came out to be funny and there was nothing special about him. Especially the white spiders made of explosive clay in Deidara's hand, those ridiculous things like toys, made Sasori snort. In his heart he had already classified Deidara as a child who had not grown up. Only ordinary children would make this kind of toy. Chapter 182. Deidara looked at Dustless and the other 4 with murderous intent. The murderous intent that broke out of his body filled the empty hall. The cold mist lingered in the air, flashing and appearing as if thousands of ghosts were screaming. Especially the air that was inhaled into the lungs had a lot of bloody smell. The environment in front of him suddenly turned into the gloomy 18th layer of hell. This kid's murderous intent is quite huge. He has killed so many people at such a young age. I have underestimated him. He withdrew his teasing gaze. Feeling the terrifying murderous intent, Kisame was a little more cautious. It seemed that this kid's young age was not bad. The number of people he had killed was not small, and judging from the scale and density of the murderous intent, many of them belonged to the masters. Take Dustless for example. The scale and density of his murderous intent were incomparably huge. Because he had killed too many people, too many masters had died in the hands of Dustless, which created his murderous intent like a god and a demon. If a kid is a kid. Look at the toy in his hand. It's obviously something that only a kid of a few years old would play with. This kid is still playing with mud at such a big age. It's ridiculous. Looking at Deidara with a sneer, Sasori did not hide the contempt in his eyes. At the same time his heart twitched fiercely. He secretly scolded himself for being so unlucky to have such a bitter and brainless teammate. Sasori's sarcasm was fatal to Deidara. He immediately scurried up like a cat whose tail was stepped on. He glared at Sasori with anger in his eyes. This is great art. You 5 idiots. Ordinary people like you can't understand the true meaning of art. You are all laughable and stupid secular people. When he mentioned the art, Deidara began to smile with an unprecedented excitement between his eyebrows. Then he looked at Dustless and the other 4 with disdain. His face was full of contempt as if he was looking at country bumpkins. He could not arouse the slightest interest. Why do I feel that this kid is so annoying? The corners of Kisame's mouth twitched fiercely. He was speechless. It's a conflict between Sasori of the Red Sand and this little kid, but the 4 of us are involved as well. Ridiculous. Not to mention Sasori, who was already unhappy. Dustless, Conan, Uchiha Itachi and the others nodded. This boy seems to think too highly of himself. They must let him know how much weight he has. This is a good opportunity. Deadale smiled cruelly as if he had already seen the miserable scene of the 5 people being blown up into pieces. His eyes flashed with a cold light as if he had already seen the miserable scene of the 5 people being blown up into pieces. This kid is quite capable. Dustless cast an appreciative look at Deadale when he noticed that his body was suddenly surrounded by the clay centipedes that came out of the ground. Although he had already discovered it, it was undeniable that Deadale's means were quite brilliant. Not only Dustless but Conan, Itachi, Kisame, and Sasori also had centipedes made of clay wrapped around their bodies. Say who sent you and I can reluctantly leave you with an intact corpse. Deadale looked coldly at Dustless and the other 3 who were bound, and at the same time he had already printed with one hand. The killing intent all over his body rose to the limit, and he was about to cause the clay centipedes to explode. I'm really sorry. Dustless looked at Deadale with a smile, deliberately dragging his tone for Deadale to hear, and said softly, bombs are very dangerous. I'm not sure if your artistic attainments can easily control the range of the bomb and leave us with an intact corpse, so... His pitch-black eyes narrowed and the demonic blood-red 3-tomo jade immediately appeared. For our safety, you'd better be obedient and let us capture you. As Dustless's voice fell, Deadale's world suddenly changed, and he was stunned to find that his body was full of spiders made of explosive clay. Deadale stared blankly at the explosive spiders all over his body. The cold sweat on both sides of his forehead uncontrollably dripped down, and his body shivered uncontrollably. Perhaps when he gave the order to detonate just now, he would have been blown up into nothingness by the clay spiders all over his body. When did this happen? Looking at Dustless and the other 4, Deadale's heart fell to the bottom with despair. It turns out that your art can't resist my genjutsu. It seems that you should join the Akatsuki, which is our organization. Deidara must join the Akatsuki. Faced with such a dilemma, he had no choice but to join. Anyway, this guy was the kind of person who wasn't welcomed in the Rock Village. The villagers of the Rock Village also avoided this crazy bomber. Therefore, the 3rd Tsuchikage Inoki isolated this kid. What if I say I'm not interested? Looking gloomily at Dustless, who was standing indifferently, as if everything was under his control, Deadale coldly asked. The corner of his eyes glanced at the clay spiders all over his body, and his expression became colder. and his unwavering tone faintly revealed the taste of death. This is very simple as long as I take the opportunity to get rid of you before I leave. Kisame took a few steps forward, and the bandage on his back was released, revealing the dense barbs which were extraordinarily sharp, and it seemed that they could easily pierce steel. It was obvious what kind of miserable end would happen to people who were injured. Kisame's face was full of killing intent, and his murderous intent was more terrifying than the previous dead ale. The murderous intent in his body continued to overflow, and the size of the muscles on his hands also increased, and he stretched out his disgusting big tongue, as if he couldn't wait to devour dead ale. This old man's disciple is not someone you can touch, damn Akatsuki. Under the unprecedented pressure of death, Daidara's will was inevitably shaken. Just when he was about to consider whether to accept the condition of Akatsuki, or not, an aged but full of energy roar exploded in the sky, and soon boundless chakra descended. In the lobby where Dustless and the others were, they were immediately surrounded by a white enchantment, isolating the outside matter, and there was a circular light inside the enchantment. Dust release. Primordial world stripping technique. Chapter 183. A white brilliance appeared in front of Wuxian and the others. Itachi and Conan, who was beside Wuxian, dodged the terrible halo one after another. Within the area covered by the white light, everything showed signs of decay and there were faint signs of collapse. One could feel the power that made one's heart palpitate. The purest form of destruction gave one the feeling that the world had come to an end. Get out of the range of that jutsu. Seeing that Wuxian was motionless like a sculpture, Xiaonan immediately shouted at him. Although she didn't like him very much, they were now teammates in the same trench. All the grievances and entanglements in the past had disappeared along with it. Don't worry, he can't hurt me. Looking at Conan with a comforting smile, Dustless closed his eyes, and the light around his body became more intense, like a small sun. It was impossible to open one's eyes. Boom. 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 Everything in the white enchantment was erased, and the empty hall instantly collapsed and tilted, turning into ruins. The ground was destroyed by the destructive force and a huge deep pit was formed. The soil in the depths of the ground that had not seen the light of day for many years was refurbished, exposing it to the sunlight. What a terrible jutsu. Kisame and Itachi looked at each other, and they could see the shock in each other's eyes, and they were surprised to see a short old man floating in the sky. Seems that one of them was killed. The short old man who could use dust release undoubtedly showed his identity. He was Inoki, the third Hokage of the Rock Village. Although it's a pity that I didn't kill you all at once, it's not difficult to deal with you slowly. Inoki stared at Uchiha Itachi and the others calmly. As for Wuxian, he had ignored him. No one has ever been hit by dust release and not died. Damn Akatsuki, unknowingly they gathered so many powerful ninjas. It seems that they are all S-class ninjas of various countries. His face suddenly became gloomy. Inoki's expression was no longer as relaxed as before, and instead, it was full of caution. These people weren't simple. Aside from the Akatsuki that was killed before, Inoki was very familiar with the identity and origin of the remaining two. Kirigakure's S-class ninjas, Kisame, and the young man with 3 Tomo Sharingan. Inoki's muddy old eyes fell on Uchiha Itachi and his eyes flashed with confusion. He seemed to have seen this face sometime in the past. It turned out to be the culprit who destroyed the Uchiha family, Uchiha Itachi, Uchiha Dustless's younger brother. No wonder this old man has a feeling of déjà vu. After staring at Itachi for half a year, Inoki's mind returned, and he remembered the most annoying smile in his life, except for Uchiha Madara, and his old face suddenly collapsed. Especially when Inoki was sleeping and dreaming, he would often dream of that face that he couldn't wait to tear apart. Fortunately, this old man brought the two of them here. This time I can eradicate you. Inoki's eyes were cold and his dry cracked mouth had a smug sneer. Soon many ninjas of the Rock Village appeared. The Yanbi Jinchuriki and the Gobi Jinchuriki were among them. It seems to be tricky. The scarlet tomo fell on the 2 Jinchuriki and Itachi muttered to himself, but his tone didn't seem to care much and he didn't even put the so-called Jinchuriki in his eyes. Even without Dustless, Itachi, Kisame, Conan, and Sasori could easily defeat the Rock Village. What's more, Dustless is not dead yet. Old man, I didn't expect you to take the initiative to send the Yanbi and the Gobi to me. This saves a lot of trouble. Boom, an ear-piercing roar resounded, and a destructive air wave immediately spread out like a tide. Under the ruins, a straight golden light soared into the sky. His thin body stood in the void, and the blue sky behind him set off Wuxian. Qingzhao stared at Anoki, and the faint smile at the corner of his mouth had a little bit of arrogance. I haven't seen you for many years, but you haven't changed at all, my sandamed Tsuchikage-sama. Looking at the familiar face, Anoki was startled. He was particularly familiar with this frivolous tone, and immediately looked at the cynical and contemptuous smile, and his proud cheeks suddenly stiffened. His old face was like being slapped several times, and his eyes were red as if he remembered something. He stared at Conan with indignation, and the corner of his mouth was twitching. How is your Akatsuki doing business? Didn't you say that this annoying guy is dead? Bastard, you actually dare to deceive this old man. You really have guts. Anoki's expression was particularly gloomy. He would never forget that when Yahiko came to the rock village to extort hundreds of millions of silver from him, he still acted like he was losing money. What does dustless mean? It means that the Akatsuki didn't complete Anoki's task, and instead he gave away hundreds of millions of silver for nothing. When Yahiko was still alive, Akatsuki's financial situation was really difficult. So Yahiko had no choice but to rob the rich from the rock-hidden village to help the poor. So Yahiko changed his plan to kill Dustless from the rock-hidden village. Little old man, don't you understand? You were slaughtered like a fat sheep. Fearing that Anoki couldn't understand what he meant, Dustless deliberately dragged his voice, and at the same time secretly gave a thumbs up to the dead Yahiko. Fat sheep. Anoki's mouth twitched fiercely and he almost vomited blood. Although the Akatsuki didn't take Dustless's head to claim the bounty, they cooperated several times, so he didn't have any doubts and gave Yahiko the task reward. Calling him a fat sheep was too flattering. Chapter 184. Anoki was trembling with anger. The word fat sheep was particularly harsh to him. He had always appeared in front of the world as a wise ninja. Often, others were the fat sheep in his eyes. Only this time the old horse lost its hooves and fell hard, causing him to suffer a double loss. I won't let this go. After extinguishing the fire in his heart, Anoki said calmly. As the saying goes, life is short. He didn't want to be famous in the world, but at the very least he wanted to completely and cleanly erase the biggest stain in his life. Old man, you've been wrong about one thing from the beginning to the end. We're the ones who won't let this go. The silent Sasori of the Red Sand said coldly. He didn't hide his murderous intent. His blade-like gaze spread like water ripples. Anoki's death had nothing to do with them. This time they just wanted to take Deladia, Yanbi and Gobi away. Bastard, get over here. A thunderous roar resounded through the sky. Then a golden rainbow poured down, whistling straight toward Yanbi Jinchuriki Old Rashi. What a fast speed. Yanbi Jinchuriki Old Rashi's pupils suddenly shrank. Fear and disbelief were reflected on his thick face. Even if he was a Jinchuriki, he could feel a strong aura of death coming toward him. Have you been kicked at the speed of light before? But it seems like you haven't. A scornful and lazy voice sounded, giving people a ridiculous feeling as if they were about to fall asleep. Before Old Rashi could react, a dazzling golden light fell from the sky, as if the light was going to blind his eyes. He instinctively closed his eyes. Speed of light kick. Boom. The liquefied golden calf attacked with full force. Out of the beast's keen intuition to danger, Old Rashi immediately used his tailed beast coat to defend his chest. Dense chakra rose all over his body, hoping to use this as a defense. Even so, he was still savagely knocked away by the unparalleled force. Boom. Old Rashi, who was wearing the tailed beast coat, flew out upside down, penetrating the mountain behind him. He whistled out like a cannonball, unstoppable. Boom boom boom. On the enormous mountain, a deep crater could be clearly seen. The broken cracks were as messy as a spider web. Old Purple's eyes were lifeless and his body was stuck in it. There was no doubt that the crater on the mountain was also left behind by him. It seems that one of them has already gone up. If that's the case, your advantage will be even smaller. Looking at the half-dead Yanbi Jinchuriki, Kisame's face showed a ferocious smile as he walked straight toward Inoki. Obviously, his target was the sandamed Suchikage. Take the stage? Inoki looked at Kisame with a sneer and said flatly, the reason why tailed beasts have become the target of all the major countries is because of their powerful strength. If they are so easily dealt with, what do you think this old man spent countless efforts to cultivate Jinchuriki for? Sure enough, as Inoki's voice fell, the fainted Yanbi Jinchuriki old Rashi stood up again. Although he was injured, he wasn't in any danger. Moreover, he had never heard of a Jinchuriki being kicked to death. I will kill you. Staring at Dustless, the Yanbi Jinchuriki said in a cold and hoarse voice. Dustless's kick did cause damage to him, but the recovery ability of a Jinchuriki can't be estimated by common sense. Although he was injured, his combat power was still there. Lava release, scorching river rock technique. Old Purple opened his mouth and spat out several dark red magma balls. The blazing fireballs were emitting a dark red halo, which was no different from the magma in the depths of the earth. They were full of destruction and quite powerful. They went straight to Wuxian, intending to swallow him completely. Why struggle? In fact, when you came to the rock village, your fate was already doomed. Wuxian's temperament was indifferent and tranquil. He looked at the roaring flames without fear. His ink-black eyes were especially bright and calm like water. His pale mouth curved a little, ignoring the roaring magma ball as if it was nothing. Boom boom boom. In the blink of an eye, Dustless was swallowed up by the hot sphere. It resonated like fuel and his whole body burned with a deep red flame. There was nothing inside the flames. All living things were forbidden and no living things could survive. This is the end of a pretentious kid. Seeing that he succeeded, Rashi's rough face was filled with a smug smile. He looked disdainfully at Dustless, who was burned to ashes. He looked at the rock ninjas who were in a mess in the distance. When he was about to go to support them, he suddenly felt a cold gaze locked on him. He subconsciously looked back. He suddenly turned around, but behind him was Wuxian, who was holding a long sword with a face as calm as an ancient well. How is this possible? The sudden situation made Rashi lose his mind for a moment. He didn't hesitate to rush out, but he helplessly found that his left arm was shackled. When he looked up, he saw Dustless's left hand grabbing his left arm. His thin and delicate arm looked fragile, as if it was as weak as a willow branch. As long as he exerted a little force, it would be easily broken. Frankly speaking, Dustless's figure is not burly, just like Uchiha Itachi. His figure is small and he belongs to the slender type. In this regard, the two brothers are similar. Old Purple struggled with all his might, trying to use the strength of a tailed beast to tear off the arm that was holding him. However, he was helpless to find that the fair and thin arm seemed to have a great strength, binding him tightly and making it difficult for him to break free. At this moment, Dustless gave Rashi the feeling that he was a tailed beast. Under Old Purple's horrified gaze, Wuxian raised the heavenly sword of gathering clouds in his right hand up high. The cold light reflected from the sword made his soul tremble. Rashi immediately waved his sword mercilessly. Chapter 185. Any creature would be afraid in the face of death. Even if Dustless is invincible now, but if the shadow of death suddenly comes one day, he will also panic. This is human nature. Those who could remain indifferent in the face of death were not human. At least Dustless thought so. Wuxian could clearly see the reluctance in Old Purple's eyes. That was a creature's reluctance to part with life and the world. Even though he was over 50 years old, he didn't think he deserved to die. People who are in excessive fear or mental disorder often do unexpected things, such as the four-tailed Jinchuriki in front of him. Poochie! There was a splash of blood in the air and then Old Purple flashed out. His face was pale and his eyes were dim and had lost their luster. He looked at the arm in Wuxian's hand and his eyes were about to burst. This is really decisive. Looking at the broken arm in his hand, Dustless thoughtfully thought. He didn't expect Old Purple to be so decisive and cut off his left arm without hesitation. He looked at Old Purple with his burning eyes and nodded slightly. Just now, Old Purple had cut off one of his arms to save his life. It seemed a little rude and brainless, but on second thought it was actually the only way to escape. Otherwise, the person who was cut in half would be Old Purple's whole body. I'm not a human being for my broken arm. Staring at Wu Chen ferociously, Lao Zi roared hysterically in a hoarse voice. His voice seemed to come from his throat, which was extremely horrifying. Combined with his rough old face, it gave people a feeling that he was a demon in the human world, which was especially gloomy. My head is here, come and take it if you have the ability. No nonsense, it's useless to talk. Staring at old Rashi fearlessly, Wu Chen said indifferently. Old Rashi's body was constantly erupting tailed beast's chakra, and the corner of his mouth raised into a sneer, looking at him with disdain. You want to unleash the power of a tailed beast by going berserk? You're just a mere four-tailed beast. You're delusional. Foolish. Perceiving the high-density chakra overflowing from Rashi's body, the disdain in Wu Chen's mouth became more obvious. Don't say that this is only borrowing the power of the tailed beast, not the full strength of the Yanbi. Even if the Yanbi Sun Wukong really broke the seal, it won't change the reality but save Wu Chen a lot of effort. Lao Purple's body was covered with flame-like armor, and he looked like a magma man. His face was blurred and he had turned into the amalgamation of chakra. His whole body was filled with negative emotions including killing, hatred, and destruction. It was obvious that his mind had been completely controlled by the tailed beast in his body. Even the chakra that he spewed out was as hot as magma, burning the ground red. The waving demonic golden tail behind him was clearly visible. Woo woo woo, a beast-like roar came out of Old Purple's throat. The cold beast's roar was like the screams of thousands of ghosts, freezing the flowing air and making it particularly oppressive. Everyone's heart was covered with a layer of dark clouds. That is, Conan, who was fighting with the Iwagakure, felt the chakra wave coming from afar. Her face slightly changed and her face was filled with horror. In the distant void, a black sphere could be clearly seen. The high-speed rotation of the black energy sphere was very oppressive, and the hurricane that it threw out was also unstoppable. It was like the autumn wind sweeping the fallen leaves. Sand and stones were flying and the flowing air was crushed and evaporated, forming a large vacuum area. The oxygen was either sucked out or evaporated and it was impossible to breathe normally. Idiot, you released the Bijadama so carelessly, what do you think I am doing? Staring at Lao Zi, who was gathering Bijadama and ignoring him, Dustless sneered again and at the same time his pupils suddenly rotated rapidly and turned into a scarlet five-pointed star Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. Amaterasu. Boom boom boom. The giant black sphere exploded with a bang, and a dark red mushroom cloud rose from the endless void. Scorching heat waves from the explosion swept across the world, and a destructive shockwave spread out like a wave swallowing everything in the surroundings. The surface of the earth was destroyed by a large-scale modification and it was vulnerable. Old Purple, who was at the center of the incident, was no exception. He was swallowed by the Bijadama at the first moment. His body was almost burnt and only his weak breathing could be heard. He was lying on the ground motionlessly. He couldn't even do the most basic escape. Obviously he had lost his consciousness. So only the Gobi is left, and that kid Deidara. Glancing at the half-dead Yanbi on the ground, and looking at Uchiha Itachi who was fighting the Gobi's Jinchuriki in the distance, Dustless was calm. If he couldn't even deal with the Gobi, then his eyes were really useless. From what the old man said, these people seemed to belong to an organization called Akatsuki. The young Dedale's eyes shone as he spied on the members of the Akatsuki organization. He was deeply moved. Even the woman he looked down on the most before was particularly awe-inspiring when she made her move. She was practically unstoppable. Only 5 people facing the Rock Village, one of the 5 major countries, were not afraid at all. Instead they were like wolves in a flock of sheep. The ninjas of the Rock Village were almost killed and they had no power to fight back. Unknowingly his thoughts had also changed. Maybe joining them would be a good thing. Being able to carry out missions with such a group of powerful people was also a disguised recognition of dead ale. At least it's much better than living in the Rock Village that isolated him and regarded him as a monster. What a powerful force. Taking a deep breath, looking at Dustless's blood-red Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, Deidara's heart was deeply touched and his voice was trembling. The powerful eye power that seemed to pierce his soul made him inevitably daydream. Tsukuyami. With Uchiha Itachi's voice, the gobi suddenly stopped moving and the chakra on his body disappeared, and he was as quiet as a kitten. Chapter 186. The ability of Sharingan is well known all over the world, and to some extent, it's the natural enemy of Bijou. Perfect Jinchuriki is okay. For example, Killer Bee, who was killed by Dustless, the power of Sharingan is not enough to control him, because Bijou and Jinchuriki's chakra can interfere with each other and can't be controlled. But the Yanbi Jinchuriki and the Gobi Jinchuriki in front of him didn't completely control their Bijou. Although it's a bit troublesome for them to control Sharingan, it's not impossible. It seems that it's completely done. Looking at the unconscious Yanbi Jinchuriki on the ground and the Gobi Jinchuriki that was controlled by Itachi, Dustless then grabbed the dying Rashi with one hand and flew towards Conan and the others. Looking around, the entire battlefield was bloody and the ground was forcibly changed. Without exception, all the ninjas of the rock village were dead. There's no need to fight anymore, Kisame. Uchiha Itachi also grabbed the Gobi Jinchuriki in his hand. It seemed that his method was much gentler. He just used genjutsu to make him faint. Compared to Dustless, who burned Rashi's body, Itachi was undoubtedly much kinder. Old man, I'll deal with you later. Kisame stared at Inoki fiercely, and then he pulled back and looked at Dustless and the others, and the corner of his mouth twitched. Kisame's Akatsuki uniform has been completely destroyed by the fierce fight, and there are even many subtle wounds on his body. It's not because he's too weak. It's because Inoki's strength is too terrifying, and the almost invincible dust release can't be touched. Kisame. Looking at Deidara, who was still in a daze in the distance, Dustless cast a glance at Kisame. I know. Kisame nodded and immediately rushed out. Almost in the blink of an eye, he came to Deidara's side and picked him up like a rabbit. Let me go, brother shark. Feeling that his body had lost gravity and was caught in the air, Deidara immediately roared at the Kisame ghost shark. At the same time, he bared his fangs and brandished his claws at the Kisame ghost shark. However, because his hands were too short, he couldn't touch the Kisame ghost shark. I will definitely kill you, you bastard. Glaring at Kisame, the ferocious look in his words was like that of a caged beast, which proved that Deidara wasn't joking. You. He waved his hand and snatched the kunai from Deidara's hand. Then he easily twisted it into a fried dough twist and threw it on the ground in disdain. He sneered at Deidara and said with contempt, if it weren't for the order of the organization, I would have killed you right now. Ignorant brat, there should be a limit even if you're conceited. Kisame looked at Deidara with disdain. If it weren't for Pain's order, he would have definitely pinched this arrogant brat to death. Itachi is only 1 year older than you, how can the gap be so big? Kisame sighed in his heart and began to sympathize with Sasori of the Red Sand, who would team up with Deidara in the future. Compared with Itachi, who never showed his emotions, Deidara in front of him was really far worse. Whether in terms of IQ or strength, there was a huge gap between him and Itachi. Seeing that his beloved disciple was caught by Kisame, Inoki's ugly face became even more ugly. His old arms quickly and skillfully printed, and a huge amount of chakra erupted from his body. It seemed that this technique wasn't simple. Earth release. Old man, are you sure you want to fight? Dustless suddenly interrupted Inoki and his chakra stopped flowing. At this point, the rock village was already defeated. The Yanbi Jinchuriki and the Gobi Jinchuriki have been caught, and now the rock village only has Inoki and there are still 5 of them. It's almost a one-sided situation. Even if the entire rock village is slaughtered today, Inoki can only watch. Uchiha Dustless, what is your purpose for capturing the tailed beast? Inoki suppressed the fire in his heart and asked gloomily. The murderous aura emitted from his pupils was like a knife, which made people shudder with fear. He faintly had a commanding tone. At the same time, he began to think about Akatsuki's purpose of robbing the beast. Old man, you don't seem to understand the situation. Hearing Inoki's commanding tone, Dustless slightly frowned and sneered. Purpose? We are not the ninjas of the rock village. You are the so-called Tsuchikage and you don't seem to be qualified to order us. Even if this is the rock village, do you think you can stop us? Wu Qin sneered, attacking Inoki mercilessly. His voice was deliberately filled with chakra, lingering in the sky for a long time without dispersing. You. Anoki's mouth twitched and his old face became even more ugly. Indeed, as Dustless said, even if Dustless and the other four went away, he couldn't stop them. As for collecting the tailed beast, speaking of this, Dustless smirked and said, of course it's for world peace. What Dust said was true. Whether it was during Yahiko's period, Uzumaki Nagato's period, or later, Uchiha Obito's period, they all had the most essential purpose, world peace, including Uchiha Madara's infinite Tsukuyami, which was actually yearning for peace. However, these words were particularly harsh in Anoki's ears. Ridiculous, in my opinion, you are the most direct cause of the world's turmoil. Anoki immediately sneered. If Dustless and Akatsuki were chasing the so-called peace, then the 5 major powers and other ninja villages were the root of the scourge of the world. In other words, he was an out-and-out great villain. Chapter 187. Dustless naturally left safe and sound. It's not that Anoki didn't want to stop them, but he didn't have the ability to do so. In this world, the law of the jungle is still the law of the jungle. Especially a mercenary organization like the Akatsuki, they don't have any morals at all. For them, as long as they pay enough, even if they have to destroy one of the 5 major countries, as long as they pay enough, they will agree. Damn Akatsuki, do you think this is over? Stop dreaming. On the vast plain, Anoki's eyes widened as he looked at the departing figures with a cold smile on his face. If the Akatsuki thought that he was helpless, then they really underestimated him. Kitsuchi. Anoki looked at his son with a cold face and said, I have a secret letter. You will personally send it to the Cloud Village, asking them to join forces to deal with the Akatsuki. Anoki sneered. Although colluding with the Cloud Village is tantamount to asking a tiger for its skin, there is no other way. If he wants to take back his Jinchuriki and his apprentice Deidara, he can only collude with other villages. The 5 rebellious ninjas are obviously S-class. Uchiha Wu and Uchiha Itachi are even stronger than the Bijou. But we don't have any bargaining chips. It's impossible to gain something without risking anything, father. Kitsuchi smiled bitterly. It's obviously impossible to pull the cloud into the water without paying a price, especially dealing with the Akatsuki, a powerful enemy that may cause the destruction of the village. Moreover, the 3rd Reikage died under the siege of the rock village. This. Anoki's expression suddenly stiffened. He realized that the 3rd Reikage was killed by him a few years ago, and now the 4th Reikage is the son of the 3rd Reikage. Maybe the 4th Reikage will kill his son to vent his anger. Although under the absolute benefits, the grievances between the 2 sides can disappear, and they can cooperate tacitly. But there is a saying that the hatred of killing one's father is irreconcilable, and it's not easy to let go. Then let's go to Konoha to cooperate. The hesitation in his eyes disappeared, and Anoki's heart suddenly became clear. Maybe the Sandaime who enjoys peace won't agree to his conditions, but he has heard about the radical figure of the pro-war faction, Shimura Danzo. This is a good idea. Uchiha Itachi and Uchiha Dustless are the traitors of Konoha. Asking them to deal with the Akatsuki is not impossible. Kitsuchi's eyes lit up and he agreed with Anoki's proposal. The only thing he was worried about was that Sandaime, who was addicted to peace, would definitely refuse this proposal. But Sarutobi won't agree. His hot-blooded heart has been obliterated. It's impossible for him to agree to this absurd proposal. After thinking about it for a while, Kitsuchi said in a deep voice, the Sandaime was a stubborn old man and he would never push Konoha into a war. Although Shimura Danzo was in control of Root, which was not inferior to the Umbu, the Kyuubi's sudden riot a few days ago destroyed Root's base. Don't worry, Kitsuchi, just tell Shimura Danzo the news. Waving his hand, Anoki said with great confidence. Shimura Danzo was the most insidious and cunning person in Konoha. As long as he told him about the alliance to deal with the Akatsuki, he wouldn't care about anything else. If he really wants to form an alliance, even if he doesn't have the manpower, he will create manpower. As for the specifics, it's Shimura Danzo's business. As long as he has the heart, it doesn't matter whether he has the manpower or not. That night, Anoki sent people to Konoha overnight and got in touch with Shimura Danzo. Unsurprisingly, when he mentioned that Uchiha Dustless was also in the Akatsuki, the old man did indeed agree to work with the Rock Village. However, what made Inoki speechless was that although Shimura Danzo agreed to deal with the Akatsuki, he didn't give a specific time, he just said, "Let's talk about it later," which made Inoki vomit blood. Feeling helpless, Inoki could only endure. At the same time, he didn't forget to secretly send ninjas to contact the other major countries, hoping to form a temporary alliance to deal with the Akatsuki. However, the plan couldn't keep up with the changes. Although Inoki predicted that all countries would be willing to form an alliance, the fact was the opposite. No country agreed. He was busy for a few days and didn't even get a fart, which made him particularly gloomy. The reason why they rejected Inoki was that all countries had just suffered the devastation of the Third World War. Whether it was their economic or military strength, they were greatly reduced, and it was simply not enough to cope with other wars. The members of Akatsuki organization might not be many, but without exception all of them were the strongest ninjas whose strength had reached S rank. Even if they had the intention to destroy Akatsuki, they would not have the strength to do so. In addition, the ninjas of the 4 major countries also had doubts and scruples about the rock-hidden village. Inoki was famous in the world for his foresight. Maybe the rock-hidden village dug a hole for them to jump in. After knowing what happened, Inoki beat his chest and stomped his feet. He secretly cursed the ninjas of the 4 major countries for being idiots. They don't know what is righteous, and they don't have a long-term vision. The threat of the Akatsuki is far greater than the ordinary ninja village. These organizations are composed of ninjas like sharks in the deep sea. Their motives are unknown. From the current situation, they are coming for the tailed beasts, and any village with tailed beasts may be the target of their attack. Although he was unhappy, Inoki couldn't do anything. In fact, the situation of the rock-hidden village was not much better, and dealing with the Akatsuki was just a matter of words. To Inoki's relief, Shimura Danzo's position was firm, and all the countries began to pay attention to this organization lurking in the dark world, and began to inquire about all the information about the Akatsuki. At this moment, inside the Akatsuki, it was a different scene. All the members gathered again. The only difference is that this gathering was different from the past. It was filled with an unprecedented smell of gunpowder. The atmosphere was particularly tense. Chapter 188. Deidara was holding countless clay spiders in his hand. His expression and meaning were quite real. These small spiders made of explosive clay were vivid and lifelike, giving people a feeling as if they were living things. If placed in the 3D world of Dustless's previous life, then Deidara could be said to be a top-notch art master. However, in the eyes of Akatsuki, these little things were really annoying and funny, especially Sasori, who was about to form a team with Deidara. He directly flew into a rage, wishing he could slap Deidara flying. "This is my art. Can you country bumpkins who haven't seen the world understand?" Looking at the small clay spiders in his hand complacently, and looking at the speechless Akatsuki people, Deidara's eyes shone, and he explained in a loud voice, "The so-called art? Bullshit art." Seeing Deidara beaming with joy and proclaiming his own artistic attainments, bewitching people's hearts, Sasori had no choice but to stand up to maintain the face of this art master, rudely interrupting Deidara's speech. "True art is the pursuit of eternal beauty. The splendor of an instant has no actual name, just like a flash in the pan, meaningless. Even if it blooms the most beautiful afterglow in an instant, after all, it is not worth mentioning in the long river of time. Only eternal beauty is an eternal immortal existence." Sasori of the Red Sand educated Deidara like an old man. His eloquence flowed like a torrent, and that voice full of magic seemed to be able to penetrate the soul of human, scaring all the elders of Akatsuki organization. "It seems very profound." Kisame tried his best to make an appearance of understanding, but his face was full of doubt betrayed him. Although he was very good at thinking, but this kind of artistic point of view he really didn't understand. Especially that expression of "I, your father, understand your meaning very well," made Dustless unable to restrain himself from laughing. Sasori explained each and every word, and at the same time didn't forget to ferociously glare at Deidara. Originally he was the #1 art master of Akatsuki organization, but as a result, this brat Deidara began to bewitch people, proclaiming his instant art. How could Sasori not be angry? Eternal art is art? That's nonsense. Deidara looked at Sasori with disdain. He turned a deaf ear to Sasori's ferocious gaze. His voice was exceptionally loud and resounded throughout the sky. The art of instant beauty is far superior to the so-called eternal beauty. The reason why you pursue the art of eternity is because of the fear that living beings have when facing the river of time. When the things around you leave you, you will feel endless loneliness in your heart. At the same time, you will have the mentality of pursuing eternity. Dedale shook his head and looked at Sasori with a hopeless look. He said contemptuously, "A mere mortal who can't even get rid of the secular heart dares to talk about what art is. Ridiculous." Dedale was like a dazzling star. His sharp eyes shone brightly as he gazed at the faces of the members of Akatsuki organization. In an instant he felt that these people were the most important audience in his life. Deidara swore in his heart that he would use his lifetime understanding of art to show off these eyesores in front of him who did not know what art was. So-called art shouldn't pursue eternal existence. Only the most dazzling splendor of a lifetime can be released in the afterglow of an instant. This is the ultimate path of art. Art? Stop the nonsense of a bastard, only eternity. Seeing this scene, Dustless didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He was speechless as he looked at the two masters of art arguing with each other about the true meaning of art. He was particularly tangled. He subconsciously looked around. The expressions of the members of Akatsuki organization were quite different. The two zombie combination of Haydn and Kukazu were obviously fooled. No matter whose art it was, they would nod and feel that it was reasonable. As for Pain, he still had a face of everything under the sun. Dustless actually knew that the one who didn't understand the most was this kid who liked to solve everything by force. What's the news about the other tailed beasts? Absolutely. Glancing at Dedale and Sasori, who were still arguing with each other, Pain was too lazy to talk nonsense. It was good to let this new combination that was about to be born communicate with each other. Hearing this, Zetsu first glanced at Dustless vaguely. After seeing that the latter's expression was normal, he said, "Kyubi is still in Konoha for the time being. The specific whereabouts of Hachibi are unknown. The Nanabai Jinchuriki is still in Waterfall Village. The Nibi Jinchuriki is still in Cloud Village. The Ichibi Jinchuriki is a kid named Gara. As for the other beasts, they are in a wild state." Zetsu naturally knew that the Hachibi was captured by Dustless. Now that Dustless didn't mean to hand over the Hachibi, he was too lazy to talk nonsense. He believed that when the day comes, Dustless will take out the bijou. In fact, the Hachibi was subdued by Dustless many years ago and became his summoned beast. Only Zetsu and Madara knew about it. The Akatsuki currently has only two-tailed beasts, the Yonbi and the Gobi that were previously captured. As for the Kyubi's In attribute chakra, it has been pulled out from the Geto Mazo by Obito. According to him, this is to prevent Uzumaki Nagato from using the Kyubi's power. For the time being, capture the other tailed beasts in a wild state. As for those Jinchuriki, let them live for a few more years. After pondering for a while, Pain said in a deep voice. Samsara's eyes flashed with a dangerous cold light, with monstrous killing intent. Anoki, this little old man, dared to announce the news of the Akatsuki to the world, which also greatly limited their actions. Although they couldn't directly attack the Akatsuki due to the Third World War, the recovery ability of these superpowers is extremely fast. I am afraid that it won't take long for them to completely recover their strength. At that time there is no need to think about it. They will definitely not let the Akatsuki go easily. Only when these ferocious tigers are licking their blood and healing their wounds, they can capture other wild beasts as soon as possible. As for the Jinchuriki of the Shinobi village, there is no need to provoke them for the time being. All the Jinchuriki are the focus of protection. If they are so unscrupulous, it will inevitably arouse the backlash of these superpowers. At that time, when everyone is in danger, they may really form a special alliance against the Akatsuki. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.